Welcome back to the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast and Mrs. Edmonds Cultural Corner. I have in the guest chair my sweet friend, Katie Danielson. I am so excited for you listeners and viewers to learn from her. She has this kind, gentle spirit. She gives you that no nonsense approach. And I love her sense of humor. We used to work in the same elementary school together. She was our school social worker. But even another fun fact, she played hockey with my husband when they were little. So we go way back, over 20 years. So welcome to the show, Katie. I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much. So tell our viewers and our listener a little bit about you. What is your origin story?
Yeah, so growing up, I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, and like I have an older brother and a younger brother, and then way later my little sister came along. So we were teenagers when she happened to come along. So for a very long time, it was just me and my brothers. And during that time, my mom and dad, like we were poor, but I didn't like know that we were poor.
Okay.
Because like we always just kind of were able, like my mom and dad always like found a way for us to do the things that we wanted to do. But I think there were times, like if I look back, like my friends would make comments that kind of let me know that I was poor, and but like I always played hockey, I always played soccer, I always played softball. Like sports was just like a part of what we did. Mm-hmm. And but like my mom, she did daycare for a while. My mom, she was, funny enough, she was a CNA, but she hated blood. So that was short-lived. My dad worked on the railroad and was gone a lot. And then he came back and what I had learned is that he took a job as like the janitor at the rink to get money off of our hockey registration and all of that. And which I didn't know that at the time, but like learning later on, that's how he helped pay for hockey for my brothers and I. Wow. And so, so then in elementary school, both of my parents decided to go back to school and go to college. And my dad went into social work and my mom went into elementary education. My mom is American Indian and decided to concentrate on American Indian culture and language. So we had just then like been immersed in language and culture growing up then. And we spent a ton of time in the Indian studies room at St. Scholastica. And my mom had note cards, like all over our, like index cards, like all over our house with Ojibwe words. And that's when like us as kids really started learning like who we are. I think like up until that point, like we knew, but we didn't know. Yeah. And really started to get a sense of who we are. And so we started going to powwows. We went to Canada one summer to, I don't know if you know who Al Hunter is, but to his reservation in Canada and went to a powwow there. And Al's kids would come to our house and hang out. And like, we were just totally immersed and it was great. And my mom was like making birch baskets and and then when she graduated, she got a job with the school district as their first, I think it was like their first Ojibwe language and culture teacher. And so she did that for a few years before moving on into a classroom. But at that time, like, we still were, very much immersed, learning who we are. So that was just like a great, like, childhood, and I watched my mom and dad really, like, do a lot of acts of service and volunteer and give to others who didn't have a lot. And, like, we didn't have a lot, but they always were helping others, So I think that kind of started me and getting ingrained in me about my path, where my path would eventually lead.
Wow, that's amazing. And yes, having the honor of teaching with your mother and seeing that light, you are the best version of both parents, the social work dad, educator mom, and culture and immersed. And yeah, chills. So learning more about your story and finding about, like you said, the acts of service, do you find yourself now as a parent and a member of, the indigenous culture and the people, do you give us an example of that act of service that you're giving back that your children are seeing?
Do you mean like culturally or just in general?
In general, acts of service, always giving back. Yeah.
Well, what I've tried to share with my kids, and ironically enough, my oldest daughter is now a school social worker. And
Love
so
that. 3 generations.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's been really fun to watch, and to watch her in her own path here. I've always tried to tell my kids, like, if you can help somebody, help someone. Like, all of my kids have a very privileged life. And, if they're able to help somebody, just do it. Even somebody, if you don't know them, if you see them on the street struggling, if you can give them, like, I shared with them stories about when I worked in Duluth and I was the homeless liaison there. And, it was the dead of winter and a guy had no gloves and it was so cold. And so I took off my choppers and just said, here, take these. And I said, you just do it. Like, you don't post about it. You don't tell anybody about it. You just do it. And those are the things I want you guys to do. You don't need to tell somebody that you did this great deed. Mm-hmm. You just feel good about yourself. And that's all that needs to happen. Or if somebody's hungry, buy them a meal. Even if it's just, if it's your friend, it doesn't have to be a stranger, but if somebody's hungry, buy them something. If somebody's thirsty, get them something. And don't ever expect somebody to do it in return for you.
Exactly.
And I just want them to be good human beings.
I love that. And I've seen you in your work when we worked together back in the day, not even hesitating. And I love your approach too of, we don't need the accolades. We don't need the parade. We don't need, oh, look what I did. And I love how you said, you don't need to post everything, but in your heart, intrinsically, you did the right thing. You stepped up, seeing somebody's time of need. Thank you for sharing that, Katie. Another thing too, with talking about how you grew up and how did you perceive multicultural education. You gave us a great example of your mom really immersing you and your siblings about your indigenous culture. How did you perceive that growing up in school in your life? Was there anything else beside your mom giving you the stuff of multicultural education?
Yeah, I really thought about that question, and I was like, really all I had was my mom. Growing up, I think even into college and my master's degree, I did not have anybody who was a person of color instructing me. Mm-hmm. I have only ever had my mom as, like, a person of color be a teacher to me. And my mom wasn't, like, technically an instructor, that was my mom.
Yes.
And that actually made me really sad to, like, think about, because I had never thought about that. And then I was like, well, I'm 45. I'm not ashamed to say my age. And I was like, am I surprised at that? And then I thought, well, not really. I guess I'm more surprised in higher education that I didn't have anybody who was a person of color.
Yeah. It same here. My mom was a teacher, and she was my multicultural educational teacher as well. We did not have anybody of color where I grew up in the Twin Cities. That was my teacher as an instructor. And you're right. Not until higher ed is when I had that experience. So, and you're right. We didn't graduate that long ago, and to know even now, it's startling of how many teachers of color are in our classrooms. Another thing I was going to ask you too, as a parent, what experiences have your children experienced? It could be positive or something that we as educators that are listening and viewing could learn.
Yeah, so my kids have Chloe's experience, and then my other two kids have had very different experiences. Chloe is African American and American Indian, and then the other two are American Indian and white. And Chloe had very different experiences in elementary school, middle school, high school. She, from comments from people that were her friends that I think if you were to ask her, like, she would say, like, I think sometimes they would say things not to be mean or malicious, not know what they were saying, to the literature that they were reading in schools. Like when the N-word would be brought up in the books, she'd be like one of the very few Black students in the classroom, to all eyes going on her. And, and then to my other two kids, when they started to get older, and then people would know that Chloe was their sister, and then people would try to like ask them, like, well, how was she your sister? And start to kind of question like family dynamics. And they'd be like, well, I don't know, she's my sister, like, and so, and even in the school system, like teachers would be like, oh, that's your sister, almost like wanting my kids to explain our family situation. And in elementary school, Chloe had components. She was like first grade, so she doesn't know about any of this. There were two of her friends, and one had dressed up as Black Michael Jackson, one dressed up as white Michael Jackson. And I remember my husband and I being like, that did not just happen. And so having a meeting with the principal and getting this letter from, because it happened to be a teacher whose kid did this too, saying like, I would never do anything intentionally. I have another kid who's of color as well, all this stuff. And I'm just like,
I know.
Yeah. And so there were just so many experiences like this where it's like you get almost so exhausted trying to educate everyone all of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard and heartbreaking because, your sisters are proud of their older sister, and for them to educate the adults, the neighbors, their peers, it's like, that's my sister. I don't ask you, where's your family tree? Like, that is my sister. And to believe me when I tell you. And again, what educators need to remember is when a parent, like you and your husband shared about the Halloween, costumes, telling you it caused harm to your child, not to excuse the affinity of another child in the same class saying, well, they're there and they didn't say anything. It's like, I'm sure they felt the same way and uncomfortable about what happened, and not using that as an excuse. So you're right. There's a lot I talk about in my work. The impact is way more important than the intention. We need to get away from, I had the best intention at heart, but the impact that you're showing to your students, it resonates with them for a long time. I'm just so happy that your daughter Chloe is this beautiful African American Indian social worker. She is representing a group of people that are advocating for all of our kids. And to see her interacting with students, I just can feel that, she's doing it and she's representing well. And
yeah, I love when she'll call me and say like, oh, my students, will come and say, oh, Miss Chloe, when she wears her hair natural now. And so, her students will say, oh, Miss Chloe, I just love your hair today or whatever. And I'll say, you know what, you're really letting those students know that they can be proud of who they are, and she'll just be like, oh, thank you. And, whatever. And I'm just like, oh, I'm just so proud of you, Chloe. This is just your thing. Like, you're just doing so good. And, and it just makes me so happy when she'll call and, talk social work, with me or whatever. And, she's doing a far better job at 24 than I think I probably would have ever done. So.
Hey, she learned from the best. I'm just saying. So my other question for you, my dear, you did a wonderful presentation with the state of Minnesota. There's this wonderful grant called Check and Connect, really focusing on engaging families of American Indian students in special ed with their teachers. And you and your principal, I would love to have him, on the show on a future episode, talking about, the amazing work you are doing at Cloquet High School and the staff and the administration of retaining our American Indian students in special ed in class and accommodating the needs that have been left behind for generations. So can you tell us more about the Check and Connect program?
Sure. Yeah, so Check and Connect it's a program that stemmed from the University of Minnesota. It's an app that they developed, and then Department of Education funded a grant to schools to actually do the work. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with the U of M and Department of Education to actually implement this program. So I work with American Indian students who are in special education. It's totally voluntary, so the kids don't have to work with me if they don't want to. But there are some parts of special education where I don't work with students. So if their IQ is too low, or if their autism maybe really prevents them from working with me. But I do have some students who do have autism that I do work with. So it kind of just depends on the student.
On their needs, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But so I would say the bulk of my students have a learning disability or an emotional behavioral disability. Mm. So we start with them when they come in to 9th grade, and then we'll follow them through till graduation. So we're going into our 3rd year of the grant. The last 2 years, we've had 100% graduation. So we are super excited about that. But what it really focuses on is attendance and that relationship and behavior, a reduction in the behavior. And so really to increase attendance and decrease the behavior, it's all about that relationship.
Yes.
So, I think anything you do just really revolves around that relationship. You're not going to get anywhere without relationship. So I'm just really a relationship person. So, it's been easy for me to come into this role. One, this is my community. We live on the Fond du Lac Reservation. I know a lot of the families already. My husband's from here. He's lived here his whole life. So when, I moved here over 20 years ago, I became part of this community. This is where my kids grew up, so having a lot of those relationships prior to this made it pretty easy to come into. But, there's always bumps and things that happen. And, some of the kids have been harder to get you to trust them than others. But, at the conference that you were at, I think the data really speaks for itself. Where we had some really high attendance issues, really high behavioral issues, and each year they've really gone down.
Yes, and you're right. It takes a long time to build trust, I think, and there's so much research out there about being infused in the community with the students you serve. It's so important. And the data, it was amazing what you and your principal, Mr. Battaglia, shared, starting from their freshman year and how high the number was of them not attending, and you being that liaison, calling them up and working with the teachers. I feel like when you are in a building and not having that good relationship with the specialists in your building, they're the ones that they know how to reach that parent. They know how to, talk to the kid in a way that you might not have that lingo or that bond yet with, and to trust that we're all in together to help the child holistically. What you shared was amazing. And that's why I wanted you on this show to share, information about this amazing program. And I will have in the show notes more information of, if your school is interested, there is a process to see if your school qualifies for Check and Connect. So I'll have that in the description below. But I tip my hat, because 100% graduation rate, man, that's amazing. It was just so cool. And of course you, Kate, who would not want to be around you and just like, come on, let's go. Let's get to class. And what can I do to help serve you so you feel comfortable that you belong? And a lot to that goes to, and we can talk all day about this in a different episode too, is the historical trauma of boarding schools, especially in Minnesota and in Canada, and the trauma that has that bridge that was broken from the student and school. So to have this with the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Ed to recognize how we can mend, that historical trauma, programs like Check and Connect is so important to have. So yeah.
And and it helps too, because I will leave the building, and I think you have to be open to that in doing a program like this. Going out into the community and going to where parents and guardians are at, I know where they live, I'll just run out there. I ran into them at the clinic, at my appointment, I got a hold of them there, I don't care about that kind of stuff. So, many times I was like, oh yeah, that's on my way home. They are just through the woods from my house. I'll just stop there on my way home, and so you have to be very open and do things that are outside of like your normal work day. Yes. And, the kids would say if they didn't play a sport for our high school, they could play for the school on the reservation. And so they'd be like, hey, are you going to come to my game tonight? Whatever. I will go and I will watch the kids. I will cheer them on. Like I said, relationships are such a key part. And also really you have to be like silly and goofy and and my relationship can be very different from teachers, and I recognize that. So they teach me the lingo, and then when I say it, they're like, Katie, don't ever say that again. I will make TikToks with them. I will, I just will be me with them, and I think sometimes my own kids are mortified, but I, just put it all out there for the kids. Yes. We have handshakes. They'll give me a side hug. They'll, whatever. I've already seen some that said like, hey, I heard you're getting a new office. I'm like, you're right. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be great. I bring my in-laws, know that the kids are hungry or thirsty, and they get, what do they call them? The elderly.
Oh, ensure?
No,
Ensure
they
the
call them like the
mission?
elderly. They're like little lunches or whatever, but they had a funny little nickname for them.
Mhm.
And so they save all the juices for me, and I bring them to school and I keep them in my fridge, and the kids know they can just go in there and take them out. And
Mhm.
you know, I bring treats and snacks, and you know, some days, you know, the kids know my kids are picky eaters. Well, you should bring some for me. Okay, so the
Okay.
next day I'll bring some leftovers and they eat a bunch. You know, it's just really, that relationship thing is everything to me. And I'm getting to the point in the summer now where I'm really missing my kids. And so I
Oh,
can't wait to see
yeah.
them. And they've already told me when I come in a week and a half, they're going to stop in, see the new office space, check it out, make sure it's kid approved.
I love
So,
that.
yeah,
Oh,
so I think that's really one of the main reasons why Check and Connect has been so successful, because we just have such a great relationship.
yeah. And you know, and I have to say, you are a part of that big success story because they feel comfortable and confident with you. You know, you show up, you know, and I think that's a big piece of that relationship. If they're saying, you know, I've got this game on the reservation, can you come? And you show up, and they're like, wow, she meant what she said she was going to. And that says a lot. So I know you don't want to give yourself credit, but I'm giving you credit where credit is due, because big part of you seeing those kids graduate is the hard work that you do. A whole bunch of that time that you dedicate to those kids outside of school is what gets them across that stage. So I'm so proud of you, my dear. So proud.
Thanks.
So before we wrap up here, is there any advice? It could be cultural responsiveness, it could be anything that you would like to share with our listeners of how we can, you know, get ready for a new school year with our American Indian students in particular. What can we do to, yeah, make them feel welcomed and that they belong?
I think, I think the biggest thing is, like, if you have staff, any staff of color in your buildings, don't always look at them to be the ones to educate you. Like, you need to do your own work, you know? There are lots of books out there. There are lots of trainings, lots of conferences. Like, sometimes you just have to do your own work. And because we get tired of always having to educate everyone, and guess what? We're not the experts on everything either. So,
yes, so true.
You know, like, do your own work, but also to welcome our kids back, you know, make them, they might, especially our Native students, they might be the quiet kid in the corner. They might be, you know, the ones that might come a little late sometimes, or, you know, whatever. That doesn't mean they don't want to be there. That doesn't mean they're disengaged. Sometimes you have to put a little bit more of your time and effort into getting to know them. But if you do that, I guarantee it'll come back to you tenfold.
Oh, I love that, Katie. I love that. And is there a way where we could find you for more information on the work that you do?
Yeah, so you can get a hold of me at Cloquet High School. I'm at 218-879-3393, extension 1312. Or you can email me at kdanielson, DANIELSON, at isd94.org. So
Awesome.
I do, you'll probably get like a bounce back that I'm out, but I do check it frequently. So.
Oh, thank you, Katie. Okay, so before we go, my favorite memory of Mrs. Danielson, I won't embarrass you too much, but my favorite memory is when we had our first day together for, you know, it was like new staff orientation, and I got my first teaching gig, and I worked alongside her mom on the same floor. So I knew Katie for years. And of course, she played hockey with my husband, Andy. We laughed. We were in the back corner and we laughed and we talked, and we're like, okay, we'll listen a little bit. And then we kept on laughing, but we worked together in the same building, and that's my favorite memory of when I see you. And when you were one of the presenters at this wonderful lead conference for superintendents and all these educator leaders for the state at the U of M. It was 3 weeks ago, and I'm like, I gotta go. That's my girl Katie. I gotta go there. And when you saw me and I saw you, we both screamed, and it felt like we were back on our first day at orientation all over again. And I will be cheering you on for your work and all you do to inspire our kids and keep them motivated to learn. So that's my favorite memory of you, my Katie. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I know I always think of that first day at the district, and I don't even remember all the stuff we learned because I probably didn't learn anything because I just laughed and chatted with you that whole time. And then at that conference the other week, when I screamed your name, I looked at the lady next to me and I go, I know her. And she goes, clearly. So I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm kind of getting in trouble right now.
We get into good trouble, I like to say.
Yeah, that's right.
We get into good trouble. And students like that. They pick up on our good trouble energy, you know. We keep them engaged. We keep them, we keep it weird. We keep it fun. And I'm just honored to know you, my sweet friend, and love what you're doing. Love what you're doing to inspire our kids and our families, and your daughters and your son are just amazing human beings, and I'm just excited to see what more they're going to do. So again, I could talk to you all day. Can't wait to talk more off camera. But thanks again for listening at the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast and Mrs. Edmonds Cultural Corner. I will see you here same time next week. Bye, folks.